Every night, I dream the same dream. And then, the nightmare begins.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was indeed madness, and was a very anticipated movie for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I will be doing this review without spoilers, and so you're safe here, and I wasn't anticipated for the same reasons that a lot of other people were anticipated for this film. A lot of people, because it had the word multiverse in, was expecting loads of cameos, and multiversal stories and a big shift for the MCU. I was just hoping we got a good sequel to Doctor Strange because I liked the world established in that film and its character, and I wanted just another standalone film with him. I liked how it was continuing from WandaVision, and I was also extremely anticipating this film because it's directed by Sam Raimi, who has made some of the most wacky horror movies and some of the best superhero movies of all time. So bring him together for a superhero horror movie was really interesting, and I was excited to see how much horror they could put into Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and because the MCU haven't necessarily gone into the horror territory before, and that's what really I was looking forward to here, along with it continuing Doctor Strange's story. But this isn't just a sequel to Doctor Strange, it is just as much of a sequel to WandaVision as it is to Doctor Strange. And to be honest, I kind of liked that, and I thought both Stephen Strange and especially Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda stole the show of this movie. And yes, you do have the multiversal cameos that are in the trailer, and yes, there are some loads of surprises there, but they are there in mainly short bursts and mainly just for one segment of the film, and it never bogs down anything. And even though maybe not overutilized, not in the movie as much as you expect, if you really keep your expectations in check, I think the majority of people are going to have a blast with this movie if you're a fan of the horror genre, as I am. But I'm a fan of horror that has some emotion towards it, and usually the horror is more human. That's sort of the horror I prefer, and this movie had that in spades, along with a lot of really surreal, expressionist imagery, along with a dazzling direction from Sam Raimi. This is one of the few MCU movies that actually has a sense of authorship. The fact the director was given creative freedom, and he elevates every piece of material here. The CGI visual effects masterwork is brilliant. I mean, it's a visually striking movie. The cinematography is out of this world in terms of the CGI and the worlds they create. It just looks magnificent. But Sam Raimi is able to make it so much more interesting with dazzling whips, pans, zooms, movement, and beautiful imagery that I think really makes this movie much more creatively interesting than a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I think the shows are really well made, but the movies are kind of stilted and stale. This movie is not like that at all. It's dazzling, it's striking, it looks fantastic, but does it have a good story to back it up? And I think so. A lot of people haven't necessarily catched on to the story of this one much because it doesn't do as much with the multiverse as you expect, but I think the core journey of the character and the multiversal stuff entwined in it is very unique and is well done. Some bits of the narrative I'm still unsure as to my thoughts on them, and I might just have to see it a few more times just to wrap my head around certain things. And I would say a major issue for the film maybe is that it does run extremely fast. I loved its fast pacing. I loved that it got me hooked in immediately and never let go, and never really gave me a chance to breathe or think about what I was watching, but at the same time, there were story aspects that were unexplored, and perhaps a little rushed that I would have liked expanding upon, and that's sort of an issue with the movie, and there are some narrative beats that are fairly formulaic, and I would say the first act isn't necessarily as exciting as what comes later, but still sets up the adventure decently, but once it cracks off into the off-kilter, strange horror movie, it gives me stuff I never thought I'd see in the MCU, and some of the horror and the violent imagery is really not as tame as I expected. They really push the boundaries of the age rating here, and they push the boundaries of the MCU, and I was very surprised with some of the stuff they actually allowed Raimi to put in, and his Raimiisms are fantastic. as well as giving you the same MCU shtick you expect, it does provide something different, and there's a lot of tension there, and there's a lot of emotion there as well, especially with Wanda. And if you haven't seen WandaVision, maybe it will harm your experience of this because it won't have as much an emotional effect because of her arc. But I still think it's powerful, and I think Stephen Strange and Wanda had a nice opposing stories about accepting your reality and learning to live in your own world, which is strange for a movie about loads of different worlds and realities. And I liked that his message sort of attributed that on a smaller scale, along with all the crazy. Its story was quite concise. Also, the new edition, America, I thought, well, was a plot device, still had some charisma behind her and was a decent inclusion. There are a few disappointments. They didn't necessarily do much with Mordo's character, and that was sort of a shame. And I would say, again, some of the multiversal cameos did just feel like, hey, look at this cool character being introduced into this universe. But I didn't really mind it because they weren't in it for very long anyway, so it didn't necessarily bother me. But it was at least exciting. The best cameo, actually, wasn't a Marvel cameo, it was a Sam Raimi movie cameo. That was pretty funny. Some of the humor worked for me, but mainly this is one of the darker entries in the MCU, and thankfully so, because it's also one of my favorite. And even though this movie does have issues, maybe more so narratively than some of the other MCU movies, it has way more style and entertainment value and emotion and uniquity than any of the other ones. So, to be honest, I applaud this one. And sometimes something doesn't have to be perfect, but the unique ones stand out to me. And they're the ones that end up being my favorite, despite not being perfect. And Multiverse of Madness, I thought was a blast. It's not for everyone. If you're faint to horror, you're probably not going to enjoy this. Kids, maybe after watching the first one, may be turned off by this. Um, and this one doesn't necessarily carry on properly from that first movie. It's definitely a completely different type of film. But I admire that. And I think Multiverse of Madness, for me anyway, was a blast. I really enjoyed it. Its style never overstays the substance of the film, and I still think the core of the movie is kept intact. And I thought this movie was an absolute blast. It's one of my favorite MCU movies by far. I'm looking forward to seeing it again. There are still bits I'm unsure about, and we'll have to collect my thoughts. And I was in a little bit of shock after a few things happened, and I wasn't given time to process. But after watching the movie, I just sat going, I'm so happy we got a movie like this. I'm so happy Raimi was given control in the areas that he was allowed to, even though there's obviously scenes that are your formulaic MCU, including the end credits. But I still had a great time. I thought it was really fast paced, immersive, exciting, unique, visually stunning, and also Danny Elfman's score. Wow, that stuck in my head. I'm going to give Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness an A. I'm also going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. Go watch it. It's great, and I really enjoyed it. So guys, let me know what you thought of Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and I have loads more written reviews of movies on my Letterboxd page, JK007, so go check that out. And of course, thank you for watching, and goodbye.